Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. I'm going to look at today again a few brief news items. There are going to be 4 topics that I'm very quickly, just in about 20 minutes, have a look at. And one of these is the US's demand, which they upheld during the Trump administration's rule, to have an exemption from a global tax deal. So what's happening? I'm going to share the news with you. This came out on Reuters, and this is an interesting piece. There has been some G20 discussions that there should be basically a new global digital tax rule. And of course, the biggest party to this legislation has to be the US, because the US has the biggest tech companies and the most influential tech companies handling the largest amount of data. And this is also about the data which is commercialized. So your private data, which is sold between companies for advertisement purposes, customer targeting purposes. About 140 countries are participating in discussions about this international corporate tax on data trade and data transmissions. But it will only work out if the US is in it. Luckily, since the Trump administration is out and the Biden administration is in, the new U.S. person who is going to be on this is U.S. Treasury Secretary designate Janet Yellen. And I think she was working with the Trump team as well, but the U.S. is taking a turn. So luckily now they're saying that the U.S. might not ask for a special exemption from this tax, which it did up to now. So the article writes, tax experts and finance officials around the world had warned that the US proposal could have allowed big US companies like Amazon, Alphabet, Google, and Facebook to opt out of whatever was agreed internationally. Yellen's statement to G20 finance ministers and central bankers was widely welcomed by European officials. So as you know, the EU has been pushing for quite a few years now, 5-8 years, to have stricter privacy regulations, economic regulations, and in general, a more solid legal framework around how the US companies handle data, what they do with the data, and how they pay taxes after their income. So as you know, Google and Facebook don't just make money on advertisement, they make also tons of money on selling our data that they gather. YouTube does the same, all the big tech companies everywhere. Of course, it's very disconcerting from a privacy point of view that this happens without giving us enough information and control over our own data, and also just simply taking a lot of it that we don't even know about. Now, even worse, the US companies and the US government supported them in this, didn't even want to pay taxes after doing so, taking all this data. Now, luckily, Washington seems to be changing course and becoming more cooperative, which is, I think, part of the Biden administration's shift towards a more friendly, more reconciliatory Atlantic partnership, so EU-US partnership. As you know, under Trump tried to sort of take on a more aggressive stance against the EU. He saw a danger, as pretty much probably all the US legislators do in the EU, becoming more unified and a stronger economic and technological entity that can compete with the US, and where some EU companies can compete with US companies. So it was very likely that if Trump would have been, or the Republicans would have remained in charge, then they would have eventually started an economic war against Europe, similarly to the Chinese one, the one against China. But luckily, Biden seems to be wanting to focus the US's powers and resources on one problem at the moment. I mean, problem from a US perspective, of course. And that is most likely going to be the US's position in the Pacific region, its competition with China, its regional power status, and so on and so on. So this is very welcome news, and I think it shows that also there are people in the Biden administration who want to break up the tech sector's giants a little bit within the US, and this move sort of recruiting Europe to do a bit of the dirty work which it would want to do anyway, is I think a good and smart move on the part of the U.S. administration. They can, and probably they're going to shift some of the blame. They're going to say, oh, our allies demanded this, blah, 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 to deflect some of the criticism that's inevitably going to come from a lot of pundits who are paid by Google, Facebook, and who are not going to like this measure. But nevertheless, this is a very, very good measure. Looking at from a global justice point of view, absolutely good. Looking at purely from a legal point of view, that it will be maybe, hopefully, we don't know yet, but hopefully a little bit harder for these big US companies to avoid paying taxes. And maybe the way they handle data can be made more transparent through stricter financial regulations as well as an ancillary. So overall, fantastic. In a letter to G20 officials released Thursday, yet another underscored the Biden administration's commitment to multilateral discussions on the global taxation issue, overcoming disagreements, and finding workable solutions in a fair and judicious manner. I mean, of course, this is, using the standard textbook expressions and just ticking the boxes in some sense. But in another sense, I think this is a very encouraging development. So I'm very happy to see this. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Even if you're in the US, you might understand that, having basically cartels, while it serves in some ways the government's and the military's interest, it doesn't serve the citizens' interest usually. So the next piece of news that we are going to look at is from The Guardian. And it's about the gig economy. So one of the things that has been a really big and discussing things in the last 10 years is that corporate HR has been marketing horrible, I think, clearly against the workers' interests is going legislation as the gig economy. The gig economy means that companies have the right to employ you on 0-hour contracts, on-demand contracts where they don't give you any fixed hours, you don't get any benefits, you don't get any pension, you don't get healthcare contributions, you don't get insurance, but they can call you in and you have to go if they want you to go in and do the job. It's also flexible and short-term contracts. It covers, for example, Uber in the US. And they were trying to push this through in a lot of countries, in Japan, in Europe, many places. And in many places, the governments were too weak to push back. I think Uber had a lot of support from the other US tech companies and often the US government teams who are negotiating and representing US interests in different countries. So what we see now is basically that the UK's Supreme Court said that people who work for Uber are employees and have to be treated as that. What that means is important from a legal, financial, and also moral, ethical point of view. It means that Uber broke UK employment law. This judgment was passed down on the 19th of February by the Supreme Court of the UK. And basically what this means is that there was a similar judgment in 2016. It's been reevaluated, but the justices upheld the same judgment. And the reason for upholding this judgment is that Uber set maximum fare, so the drivers can't really decide how much they charge, but an independent contractor can do that normally. So obviously, the drivers for Uber are not independent contractors. The company tells them how much you earn for a certain amount of work. Drivers had no say in their contracts, right? Again, if I'm an independent contractor, we have a negotiation. I don't just accept what kind of contract you push down on me. The application imposed penalties if drivers cancel too in a request. Again, if I'm an independent contractor, I decide when and how much I work, not the company. That happens only if I'm an employee and I agreed to that. And employees had little or no ability to improve their economic position through professional or entrepreneurial skill. So again, an independent employee should be able to do so, right? If I upskill, I should be able to charge more for my services. And this is not something that the contracting company should be able to regulate or prevent me from doing. But, at Uber, if I became a better driver, a more punctual person, whatever, if I upgraded my car, I could not do anything. There was no way to earn more money. Sorry, I wasn't working for Uber, but this is about people who were. So in practice, the only way in which people could increase their earnings was by working longer hours while constantly meeting Uber's measures of performance, which meant they worked for Uber and not for themselves. I think this is a very sound and elegant reasoning. perfectly valid. So the legal point here is people in the UK and most likely soon in the EU as well will count as employees of Uber, which means Uber will have to take care of them as employees, offer them contracts, offer them contributions to pension funds, health insurance systems. It will count as employment. There will be a contract which will be negotiable, and so on and so on and so on. So one of the really good things about this is that Uber has been pushing down wages. Uber and the other tech companies try to position themselves as doing something good. Oh, we're breaking down the taxi companies and these horrible prices are going to go away. But you know what happens if those horrible prices go away? Uber pays very, very low wages to the people who are doing the job. And a lot of those people are not professional. So the service that you're going to get is also going to vary in its versatility. People still love and use it, many people say. Sure, there's no reason why we shouldn't enable people who want to do this kind of job to do it. This is not about this. It's not preventing people from doing the job, but it's regulating the way the job is done. Without regulations, the companies will take as much advantage about the people from the people working from them. Of the people working from them as they can, which Uber was trying to do and is doing in the US without much disturbance, sadly. So, mind you, it doesn't go the whole way to regarding Uber drivers as proper employees. There are 3 employment categories under UK law. Employees who are guaranteed employment rights and benefits, workers who enjoy some of those rights, and self-employed who have very little protection. So the Supreme Court has just moved the drivers from the third, the self-employed category, to the worker category. But it's a start, right? That's what the article says, and I think that's true. I think the workers should take up this claim and push for full employee status, because that's what they are, let's be honest. The gig economy is a cheat. Big HR is trying to sell us being available anytime for very, very low wages. And this is not freedom. This is the opposite of freedom. This is basically a very disgusting form of, not slavery, but very, very poor, very low level wage labor, day labor. And no one can depend on their, for that, on their income and livelihood properly. You can't plan with that. You can't do anything with that. So it's just not fair. A rich, big entity organization should not be able to use society's infrastructure and labor market simply to their own advantage. Companies are vehicles which need to create value. If they only create value for their owners and their investors, a society does not need to tolerate them. We can force the company to change and operate in a way in which it still creates value, it still creates profits for the investors and the owners, but it has to redistribute some of its profits in a way that's good for the wider society. Companies and businesses exist in societies. They would need nothing without the infrastructures which are built up and operated on tax money, and which people use, and they're employing people. They're using their times, their lives. These are people who are working for Uber who also have kids. They fall ill, and so on and so on. So companies need to be forced to go this way. And I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of this kind of legislation in a lot more stricter and more demanding ways, hopefully soon. Right. So, well. What's going on? Right. So, for example, one of the disgusting things about Uber was that some people offered very, very, very cheap rides. And one of the really tricky things about these kind of companies is that they try to stay unprofitable in order to avoid taxation and legislation, but that's just a trick. They usually have some kind of ownership structure behind them where the money is taken out in a clever way. Like we say, oh, Uber is working with a license, and this is a license owning company, so we have to give all this money to the license owning company. They made a profit, what we didn't, because the license was so expensive. But it's the same people who own the license giving company. So this is just a clever ploy by them to get the money out of Uber without incurring certain legal duties and paying certain amounts of taxes. These kind of tricks are sadly very common these days, and the US is, I'm not saying no other country is doing this, but the US has been supporting and upholding this kind of tax haven-like shields towards their own companies. So what I mentioned before, the Reuters news about the US giving up the demand for exemptions for its tax companies for international data trade and data transfers. it's a similar thing, right? The U.S. is pushing for exceptions, and it's using usually its military power and economic power, access to its market as bargaining chips, which is again quite not very nice, but it is what it is. Right, and Uber, which until recently had the most toxic corporate culture after Facebook, is unlikely to play nice. Yes, we had a taste of that in California a while back when it and an alliance of other gig economy companies shelled out $200 million to successfully support Proposition 22, a measure that allows them to continue classifying their drivers as independent contractors rather than employees with mandated benefits. It's very, very sad that this thing went through in California. It's horrible. So here's a bit of the rhetorics that Uber is using to sort of sell it. They want to. One of the disgusting things is these companies are not honest. They're not. Well, look, we just want to make a lot of money, and we're going to use you if your governments let us use you in that way. They're stupid, but that's what we want. They're trying to look like the white knights in shining armor. They're saying things like, it is important to preserve the freedom of 600,000 European workers to access flexible earning opportunities. Right, it's not a flexible earning opportunity. That's an insecure, very unstable and casual work. That's what it is. It's okay for a teenager to get some pocket money, but you can't expect people to commit to this. Sadly, because Uber and many other companies are killing a lot of traditional companies which offer normal employment to people, this is happening more and more. People buy into these services because they are cheap, and people don't think about the ripple effects that these are having in their society, that you're destroying the livelihood of other people who won't be able to purchase the services of other people who are in turn your customers, your whatever you're doing. You might be a plumber, your clients won't call you because they don't have any more normal income. You're a kindergarten teacher, well, the kids' parents won't be able to pay for your nice private kindergarten or the extra services which bring you in some extra money. You're a restaurant owner, there will be less customers, fewer customers. You're in industry, you're selling some kinds of machine parts, but fewer people will use the services in which those machines are used. So your company manufacturing or selling or marketing those machine parts will also suffer a loss. So, pushing towards this kind of legislation and just benefiting these companies and their investors is a horrible thing. It's been a very, very sad trend in the last 20 years, and one of the worst ways, one of the most widely discussing ways in which tech development has been used recently. So we have to cut that down, and this is a good starting step. I particularly appreciate that that in this case, the UK made this step relatively quickly. This is a very political decision because the US is standing up very strongly diplomatically, economically for its companies. And it's willing to punish and push smaller countries for dealing this kind of blow to its companies. So one of the good things is they got out of the EU and they showed that, well, we're willing to fire at least some moderate shots. We need to see more whether this is going to be a trend or whether they just wanted to, look good after Brexit. But hopefully this is going to be something that will hold up and continue this kind of legislation. In this case, actually, being in the EU might have been harmful because the company Uber would have had recourse to ask for a re-evaluation of the judgment by the European Court of Justice, but they can't do that this way. I think the European Court of Justice would have upheld the UK Supreme Court's decision, but that would have taken probably at least a year, if not more. Right, and then one last really short and quick one. This is actually a longer piece. I recommend you to read this. It's very entertaining, very interesting, and very informative. And it's about disinformation for hire. What it does is it details how a lot of the companies which work these days as marketing companies online, what they really do is they're basically helping you to set up content farming automatic collection systems. What this means is they're looking at what messages sell best, what are the most popular messages at any given minute or hour of a day, and they help you to optimize your messages in that way. If those are fake messages, if those are messages which are widely misleading, if those are basically, if that is basically disinformation by a government, a company, an individual, a malicious organization, they're willing to do that for money. This is a very worrying and sad trend. Of course, we know about this happening also in print media. We know about this happening in TV channels where you can buy advertisement time, and in exchange you probably get good coverage. However, it's a very specific and very hard to track, notoriously evasive form of this kind of disinformation spread, propaganda spread. And this Buzzfeed article report is nice because it helps us to understand some of the moving elements a little bit better. So it might help to lead better moral crackdown. The public opinion can take shape, and people can agree on what needs to be done, what the problem is. We need to take action, and that usually leads to pressure on decision makers, which can be then turned into laws that regulate and control this kind of behavior. I wanted to discuss one more topic, but sadly I have to say goodbye. I'm teaching a class soon. If you're interested in any of these topics or similar issues, I'm teaching philosophy, I'm teaching ethics, and a little bit of international relations. Feel free to visit my personal site and book a session with me. And you're, of course, also very welcome. And thank you for your attention today. Have a nice day.